it's not history. That's probably the most important thing to say about the book of Joshua. No one really knows how it is that the people who came to be known as Israel first took possession of the land, what that process was like. For a long time, it was believed that it happened more or less as described in the book of Joshua, that people already formed into a tribal confederation with a strong sense of national and religious identity came up out of Egypt, wandered in the wilderness, as described in the Exodus, and then invaded and took over. But the problem, well, one of several problems with that theory is that the archaeological evidence really doesn't support it. There isn't really, as the modern science of archaeology has excavated the Holy Land, particularly in the last couple of centuries, there hasn't really been any kind of consistent proof that such an invasion and destruction of Canaanite cities, as is described in the book of Joshua, actually happened. There's also the theory been put forward that then it must have been a kind of gradual infiltration over a period of time. And current scholarly, I wouldn't say consensus, because there is none, but a perhaps preponderance of opinion holds out the theory that in fact what took place was something more along the lines of a peasant revolt. That people already living in the land of Canaan, perhaps joined by folks who had fled slavery in Egypt, rose up against the dominant caste or social class and established independent, communitarian, peasant, tribal villages. But in any case, it seems pretty clear that the book of Joshua, and at least something like the form that we have it now, wasn't written down until maybe about the 7th century BCE, when King Josiah set out to reform Israel and its religion, and to reunify parts of the land, particularly to bring back under the sway of Judah portions in the north that had been lost to the Assyrian Empire a century or so before, taking advantage of the collapse of the Assyrian Empire and a period of dynastic confusion in Egypt, to try to reestablish something like what Israel had been under the united monarchy of David and Solomon. It was about that time that the book of Deuteronomy was written down as a kind of recapitulation of the Torah, and that the history of Israel in the land began to be written. But written with a theological point of view. Not as history the way we moderns tend to think of it. There was no concept, really, of a science of history. There were stories that could be woven together to establish a theological and even ideological foundation for the organization of power. And that is at least one way that religious texts work. They establish the theological and even often ideological foundations for the organization of power. And this story of Joshua gathering together the tribes of Israel, kind of neatly bookends a story of Moses gathering the tribes just before their entrance into the land. A story in which Moses put before the people of God a choice between life and death, a choice that hinged on their keeping the statutes and the ordinances that God had given them on Sinai, and remaining single-minded in their worship of that God, the liberating God who is I am, I will be who I will be, who is not to be depicted in any image, whose name is not even to be spoken. That choice is the choice between life and death, between their enjoying prosperity in this land of abundance, flowing with milk and honey, that they are about to take possession of. The story in Joshua kind of is a mirror image of that. Now that they have done it, now that they've gone into the land, and they've driven out the peoples and exterminated them wholesale, and Joshua has divided up for each of the tribes their own allotment within the land. Now he gathers them again for this covenant ceremony to put again before them the question, who will you serve? Question that King Josiah put before the people of Israel those many centuries later, as he was trying to reunify them into a political and religious entity distinct from the empires of Egypt and Mesopotamia and from their gods. And the final form, or, to be as if religious texts are ever final, of this story probably wasn't really worked out until after Josiah's time, when the Mesopotamian empire of Neo-Babylonia rose up and again conquered the land and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, giving a new meaning to these questions. Whom will you serve? Will you put away the gods of those other nations? Be faithful to me. Incline your hearts only to me, the God of Israel. That land which you lost, which God took away from you because of your faithlessness, because you corrupted the pure religion and the Torah, the commandments to live together in unity and brotherly and sisterly equality, to love your neighbor as yourself, and to care for the orphan and the widow and the sojourner in your midst. You neglected those laws, and you adulterated your worship. And that is why you now are in captivity in Babylon, pining for your homeland. nexus of Torah and of land and of people. Such a powerful unifying force in the religious imagination, that it has sustained the Jewish people down through centuries of living as exiles, wandering among the nations of the earth, persecuted wherever they go. And so it was that in the 19th century, as old empires fell into decay and the nations of Europe began to promulgate the idea of nationalism and of national self-determination, it's not that surprising that some Jews looked to Palestine, to their ancient homeland, under the sway for so many years of the now tottering Ottoman Empire, and saw an opportunity to go home, to create there a national homeland for their people. Why not? Among all the nations of the earth, should the Jews not have their own homeland, their own nation, their own place where they could live free and develop their unique cultural and religious gifts to offer as equals among the nations of the earth? It's a powerful summons. And it only had one problem with it, which is that there were already people living there. One tragic flaw. A tragic flaw we can already see in the book of Joshua, in the book of Judges, and the whole history told by the authors of the book of Deuteronomy. Because if Israel had actually done what the book of Joshua says they did, and actually did drive out all those foreign peoples, then there wouldn't be these continual struggles against the Philistines and the Canaanites, and continual calls to purify their worship from the contaminating influence of those foreigners in your midst. It's not history. But there is always the temptation to make it so. Always the temptation to create from religious texts an image for oneself of what God's providence must be. This powerful nexus of God and of land and of people continues to hold tremendous influence here in the United States of America, where our own ancestors came to this continent, imagining they were establishing a new Israel. How many place names in the United States are there like New Canaan and Salem, as in Jerusalem? Our Puritan forebears came here imagining an empty land that by divine providence had been given to them to establish a godly empire from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and then from there to carry the blessings of liberty and democracy and Protestant Christianity throughout the world. Only one problem. We're already people here. If it was necessary to dispossess them, to kill them, and to force their children into boarding schools, to forget their language and their culture, well, that is the price of progress. So it will take to establish God's reign on earth. God's reign on earth. For the followers of Jesus, that was the hope. And yet, strangely, it rested not on any idea of a godly nation. It rested rather on the almost diaphanous hope that is the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. How do you establish a godly empire on that hope? On the hope that the archangel's trumpet will sound, and there will be a call from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise from their graves and be caught up into the clouds, and we will be caught up with them, not to then hop on to the heavenly spaceship and rocket away to some other place, but to greet the Lord as he comes to earth, to finally effect the complete transformation of humanity. An unimaginable situation where the living and the dead, people from every tribe and family and nation, surround the throne of God in that garden city, where there is no longer need for any temple, because God himself is in the midst of his people. And they can see her face to face. And there is no time when the gates of that city are ever shut, because there are no more enemies from which we must defend our national security. How do you build a community on that hope? Well, bring a flask of oil. If you're wise, don't expect that this little lamp that you've got right now, your own understanding, your own tendency to put yourself at the center of the story. Don't expect that that's going to get you there. Bring a flask of compassionate practice, a flask of prayer, a flask of devotion to something that you can't even glimpse because only God can make it. But be ready. Be ready to go out and greet its coming. That day when God comes to be married to all humanity. Carry your little flask along with your lamp so that you can keep the light of hope burning. Little flask of wisdom, of patience, of kindness, of humility. Of the willingness to believe that it's really not about us. It's not about our godliness. Our collect this morning says that Jesus came into the world to destroy the works of the devil. Sounds kind of scary and sounds kind of exciting, but the main problem is, what are they? So many of the works that set out to be godly, set out to be holy, that set out to be just, somehow, because we put ourselves at the center of the story, end up looking like works of the devil when all is said and done. End up with bombing hospitals, driving women and children from their homes, refusing to admit that enough violence is enough. At some point, you got to stop and talk, even to your enemy. So, one of the little practices that we have in our flask of wisdom is what we sometimes call stewardship. Practice of giving generously to those in need, and also to this collective little project that we call the church. This little flask of oil here that we hope will sustain a community of Christ's death and resurrection as long as it takes for him to get here. This time of year, we sometimes invite members of our congregation to come and give their own little testimonials about how they fill up that flask. And one of our favorite people to invite to do this is Clif Hill. He's done it many times before, and he does it so well that we've asked him to do it again. So thank you, Clif, for agreeing once again. Fill up add a few drops to our flask today.
hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out where do I fit in with all this. I used to know, or had a pretty good feeling, I think. I remember sitting off to the side of the church, trying to be as inconspicuous as I could possibly be. And this lovely angel named Suzanne Gray came and sat down next to me and asked me if I'd like to be the crucifer. What is a crucifer? Crucifer is the guy who carries the cross. And I said, well, I'll give it a try. And I liked it. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. It was, there's something neat about it. You remember the phrase, hold high the cross of Jesus? You grab that big old cross there, that big brass bronze cross, weighs a ton. There was a time where I could pick that up with one hand, lift it up with one hand, and carry it all the way down to the heart of the sanctuary, lifting high the cross of Jesus. These days it takes two hands just to hold the microphone. I did pretty well with and then one day I lost my balance. I started losing my balance, and I fell with the cross. There's a ding in the cross. One of the arms is a little bent, and that's my fault. I get that. It was kind of a wake-up call that things were starting to change with me. But I managed to be the crucifer for quite a while. I even went so far, we didn't have any investments that would fit me. So I had a hard time finding an album that I could wear. Finally found a tent maker in upstate New York. Got me an album that would fit. And still have it. Can't. I tried to put it on the other day. I can't. Amazing what happens to your body as you start getting older. So anyway, we're trying to figure out where do I fit at St. John's now. I was a warden at one time. I was a treasurer at one time. I can't sign a check now anymore. My fingers don't work well enough to even sign a check. So what do I do at St. John's now? I mean, I can't pull weeds, I can't mow the lawn. I got a new vehicle. It's a silver Ram van that will hold this contraption that carries me around in it. And my granddaughter is the family representative for naming cars. And anybody gets a car, my granddaughter is the one that selects the name for it. And so Lucinda decided that the name for my new van will be Silver. And okay, that sounds good. And I got to thinking, the steed for Silver, was a steed for the Lone Ranger. Wow, maybe that's my new role. The Lone Ranger was my second favorite show on the radio. I can remember lying on the living room floor in front of the big Motorola console radio, looking at the little orange dot that lit up whenever the radio was on, and feeling the heat from the big Space Patrol. That was the best one. I remember when it came on TV, it was such a disappointment because it was so hokey. But on the radio, it was wonderful. Anyway, so now I've got a silver vehicle that takes me around. And my role at St. John's is the lone haranguer. That's what I'll be. Every church needs to have one. You know, the grumpy old guy that sits in the hall during the congregational meeting and has an opinion about everything. Doesn't hesitate at all to tell people what to do. And he's always right. That's the best thing about being a lone haranguer. So today, after about a thought, assuming my self-appointed position as lone haranguer at St. John's, I'm here to harangue you about stewardship. What a wonderful thing we have here. What a marvelous thing we have here. I remember I first came back to St. John's after being away for a while. Came back after the schism. And there was some magic here. And I couldn't understand it. Could not understand what the magic is. I mean, of course it's a lovely church. But the magic at the corner of 5th and C is not so much this marvelous building as it is the thing that exists here, the miracle that exists here. Then one day it dawned on me. It was when the disciples were scared to death. Christ had been crucified. What's going to happen now? The thing that we'd expected, this coming of the Messiah, turned out to be dreadful. This wasn't a king riding on a horse with a sword in his hand that would wipe away the enemy and create a new Jerusalem. This was dreadful. The disciples were hiding. And then Christ appears, and they want to know, where are you going? How will we be with you? How will we know you? And the miracle is announced by Christ. Wherever 2 or more of you are gathered in my name, that's where I am. That's where I'll be. That's where it is. How do you know God? You know God through other people. That's where God lives. And I found that at St. John's. It's a marvelous thing. It's a miracle. A miracle. And we see it every day. It doesn't just have to happen at the corner of 5th and C. It happens every place. Wherever 2 or more are gathered in my name, that's where I am. But here is a structure that exists for the purpose of celebrating that miracle. And it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. So, I support it. And I said before how I came to the idea of how much I should support. How much should you give? What should your stewardship be? I rely on a crutch. I use Uncle Sam as my guide. I go to my 1040 and I look down at the adjusted gross income line. And if that's good enough for Uncle Sam, it's good enough for me. And I shift the decimal point one place to the left. So I get 10% everybody makes sure that that line gets to be as small as it can possibly be before you submit it. And so I take 10% of that line and I divide it by 12. And that's what I give them once a month. First time I did it was scary. I this funny feeling in the pit of my stomach. That's an awful lot of money. what if this should happen, or what if that should happen? I'll need that money for something, or gosh, that's an awful lot. It's so if you feel so good when you flip a $20 bill into the plate, but man, when you